Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition, as always on Thursdays, and maybe especially this week. It's important to talk to Duane Generalissimo Patterson, Master of the Universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners. We've got the State of the Union, we've got war in Ukraine, we've got Texas's elections, we got all sorts of different stories that we can talk about, Duane. Hey, you're the guest. Where do you want to go first?
I mean, you start with the news, right? You got to start with Ukraine. You got to start with what's going on there. It's not looking real good if you're in Kherson or parts of Kharkiv. There's
Mariupol. Mariupol is
under siege right now. Look, it's what a lot of us feared it would be. You know, we have a large scale Aleppo going on here. It's your heart is with the Ukrainian people. You kind of wanted them to be able to stick it to the Russians and reject the assault. You wanted the Russian military to be feckless and have it all blow up in Putin's face. You want to kind of will it to be so, but it's still kind of what's the old saying? Quantity is a quality all of its own.
Right.
You know, you can be inept, but if you're inept with 10 times the size of your opponent's military and or force structure, you're going to end up over time, you're going to win that war, right?
Maybe. I mean, honestly, if you take a look at what's going on here, it's, I think that there's a limit to that. And I mean, this morning we're finding out that Ukraine still has fighters in the air, fighters and other air assets. I mean, how do you conduct this if you're the Russian military and not grab air supremacy right off the bat? How do you send a 40-mile column from Russia towards Kyiv without having flanking units along the lines and making sure that you don't stall out due to a lack of gasoline and food? I mean,
I totally agree with you, but at the same time, how do you, if you're in the West, knowing that Ukraine still has fighter jet capacity and they still have anti-aircraft capacity to be able to kind of protect, how is it that in the West, between all of our rich countries, we can't seem to float a dozen A-10 Warthogs or something to rain hell down on that 40-mile column?
We promise, actually, and this morning, the Ukrainians are raining hell on that 40-mile column. That's the reason why I bring it up, is that Military Times reporter, I'm trying to remember his name here, just saw it go across here, Neil Hauer, reported that Ukrainian air assets just attacked that stalled convoy. And I mean, what you do, this is pretty simple. What you do is you disable the front and the back of that, then you just play turkey shoot with the rest of it. Right. So the West did promise, or at least the EU, I should say, and here's where we're going to get technical. The EU promised dozens of older Russian-based fighter jets, MiGs, that were apparently we just had them laying around.
Which aren't the best for air to ground. They're okay air to air, but...
Yeah, but you can protect the assets that Ukraine has air, in the air using these planes. I mean, something's better than nothing, right? I mean, this is the Sherman tank argument, right? Is that the Sherman tank was not the equal to the Tiger or Panzers, but we could produce a crap load of them, and we could, and the Germans couldn't. So
quantity became a quality all of its own.
Quantity became a quality all of its own, exactly. And then the NATO, so they sent dozens of pilots to Poland and Romania and Hungary to pick up these jets that were just laying around. We had them just laying around. And it was such a heartwarming story until NATO realized that they were going to be flying from NATO airspace into the war, and they said, no. No, we won't be doing that. And I mean, honestly, there's still workarounds for that, but the workarounds are terrible. The easiest workaround is to fly them to Chisinau, Moldova, which is not a NATO country, and then from Chisinau into the war zone, and then you can have this sort of plausible deniability.
The veneer of plausible deniability, which is about as thick of a veneer. I mean, to be honest, it's about as thick of a veneer as Vladimir Putin's premise for the whole thing to begin with.
Well, and not only that, but we're sending javelins and all sorts of other
Stingers.
arms over the ground, right? I mean, I guess you could just roll these suckers down the road past the Ukrainian border.
So yeah, I'm not sure the distinction without the difference here. I mean,
yeah,
technically, we're not pulling the triggers.
Right. All we're doing is giving them the planes. This is
Right.
Lend-Lease, which the Russians should appreciate because it saved their ass in
So
1941.
If you are Putin, you're looking at that going, okay, so I'm at war with all of NATO, except that it's, NATO's trying to pretend that, oh, we're not in the war. Well, they kind of are. I mean, they really honestly kind of are.
They kind of are, but I think at this point, the pretense is helping Putin more than the other way around, because after watching the Russians fight in the field, there is simply no way. There is simply no way that Putin could wage conventional warfare against NATO and succeed. I mean, I know the dream here was to, after you wrap up Ukraine, you go over to the Baltic states. There is zero chance of that now. Absolutely none. Finland's probably going to end up joining NATO. Sweden's probably going to end up joining NATO. And we're already rolling tens of thousands of troops into the Baltic states, and also Poland, also Hungary, also Romania.
Which should have been there months ago.
Or at least weeks ago, right? At least weeks ago. Yeah. So, I mean, you've got all this. You've got all this going on. You've got Russia now. Sort of the masks are off, which we'll talk about in a completely different context, I think, a little later on the podcast. But the masks are off. I mean, Macron, as we're speaking, Macron is giving a readout of his talk with Vladimir Putin. He's one of the few Western leaders still speaking with Vladimir Putin directly. And Macron says Russia just wants to annex the entirety of Ukraine now. So this is going to get worse. They are going.
Well, and again, here's my biggest problem with all this. If that's his plan, the premise for going into Ukraine, one of the quote premises that he used was that he could not have a NATO country on his border. That's why he was worried about Ukraine joining NATO. He wanted the guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO because we can't stand it. It's an existential threat for Russia to have a NATO country on our borders.
Right.
Well, okay. Never mind the fact that they actually have NATO countries on their borders already.
Have had. Norway has been a NATO from the beginning. Norway's been a NATO country.
So it's a BS premise, but. Okay, so he invades and swallows and annexes Ukraine, whether he calls it Putingrad or whether he installs a puppet government, but it's basically West Russia, right?
Right.
For all intents and purposes, it's West Russia. What are the countries that are on the borders on the western side and southern
Poland, Hungary, Romania. He'll try to absorb Moldova too. Moldova's not a NATO country.
Well, yeah, I mean, Moldova will be gone in an hour. It's a small country. We understand that, but are there not NATO countries on that border?
Yeah, there's NATO countries all over the place there.
All the way around it. So, So how does his calculation change at that point?
Well, I mean, it's a
BS premise. It
was always a BS premise. And this sort of, I mean, we can talk about Western miscalculations in terms of trying to engage Ukraine in NATO and Georgia in NATO. And I think that those are legitimate criticisms of the West. But it's clear that Putin isn't really motivated by that all that much. What he's motivated by is a new Russian imperialism. I mean, I
think he's motivated by, he's 70 years old. And by the time he starts gumming
69,
Yeah, but by the time he starts gumming his borscht, he wants Mother Russia to be to be in her former greatness, so he can go off to glory, knowing he brought Russia back. Right.
He wants to be one of the great czars. He wants to basically restore the imperial Russia without the Soviet trappings, and maybe even with some of the Soviet trappings.
Well, if you look at how he's repressing his dissenters, it's.
Well, and that's something interesting too, because there's an interesting development on this. It's not getting a ton of attention, but we talked to Father Marcel Guarnizo about this on Tuesday. So, my antenna are up on this. Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church had a sermon on Sunday, which basically was making him a mouthpiece for Putin's justifications for this war, that there really isn't a Ukrainian people, and these are the Ukrainians are Russians, and we need to put an end to people trying to sow division between Russians. And now he's got a revolt on his hands. 176 clerics in the Russian Orthodox Church just signed a letter not breaking away. I want to be very careful about this. Rebuking Patriarch Kirill and that stance of the church, and the Vatican is now reporting that number has grown to 233. Now, that's a fairly significant amount of priests and clerics who are going to be talking to people in their parishes, or whatever the cognate term is for Orthodox Church, about the evil of this war. I mean, Putin has been counting on having a subservient Russian Orthodox Church as part of a propaganda effort for many different purposes, not just this purpose, but for many different purposes. And I will also say this, because I said it in the post, is that Putin has used that as a pretext to get benighted Western jock sniffers on his side as some sort of fide defensor of Christianity, when Putin doesn't give a crap about Christianity. Putin cares about Russian imperialism, and maybe scales are starting to fall from the eyes there too.
I don't see in the New Testament anywhere, since we're talking about Christianity and how you're supposed to act and go about things. I don't see anything in Christianity where leaders are supposed to use cluster munitions and vacuum bombs on residential neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Hospitals,
or attacking, invading another country unprovoked for what's annihilation is one way of putting it, but for annexation.
It's a genocide. It's basically a genocide.
It's a genocide. It's a forced Anschluss. I mean, this is basically the Anschluss all over again. If you look at this, I mean, if you have any sense of history, these are the same pretexts. And I hate to bring it up, because I know you run into the whole Godwin's Law thing about everything ends up being about Hitler. But really, honestly, this is the same pretexts that Hitler used for the Anschluss of Austria, for the forced Anschluss of the Sudetenland. And the Austrian Anschluss was clearly under military force too. I mean,
and so what do we in the West do? What does the United States do? We're continuing to still finance it.
Yep.
It's just beyond outrageous. Even the Brits this morning, late breaking news. I mean, whenever you hear the podcast, it'll be a few hours old. But as fast as news breaks, it might as well be a few years old. But this morning, on Thursday, the Brits had announced that they were going ahead and finishing off the pulling out all Russian banks, even the ones that process all of the oil revenue and gas revenue. They're pulling them out of SWIFT.
Right.
It's inexplicable to me why we didn't do it. We had Brian Westbury, senior economist for First Trust Portfolios, a real smart guy, and we asked him, so what happens to us here if we employed the SWIFT option and pulled them out and quit buying Russian oil and gas? And he said that there would be a spike in the short term, but by and large, as far as the market goes, as far as how he says most investors kind of already built that in. They already know that's coming. It's just a matter of when, not if. It's not going to be that big of a shock to the system in the overall scheme of things.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, there's also some really interesting developments along these lines, too. First off, today is the fourth day in a row that the Russian stock market has remained closed after having almost 50% of its entire capitalization disappear.
Did you see the video of the Russian
the
financial
trader?
expert?
Yeah, the trader.
The trader with the bottle saying, doing the funeral speech to capitalism.
Yeah, he did the Russian equivalent of pouring one out for the homie on television, saying that from now on he's just going to be a Santa because the Russian stock market is dead. It's been closed for 4 days. There's also now evidence that even though we haven't put an explicit embargo on Russian oil, nobody's buying it. There was a couple of articles on this where Russian oil sales, they had Russian oil auctions at deep discounts and still nobody's buying it. So even without, in part because some of the sanctions could be triggered on other entities that participate in that sale. And so everybody's nervous about it.
Kind of a second generation effect, even though that we won't explicitly sanction Russian oil and gas exports, anybody that touches it, it's fruit of the poison tree.
Well,
and we'll go after them.
We won't even stop American companies from buying it here. I mean, you don't necessarily have to sanction it to do that.
Right. However, because of the optics of it, BP and Shell and Exxon have basically said, okay, we're done with this. We can get it somewhere else.
Right. So in a way, this brings us around to the State of the Union address. I just want to finish up one thing here. Has anybody figured
the most reprehensible collection of garbage in 75 minutes I have ever seen? But we'll get to it.
Come on, man. I've watched Joe Biden for 40 years. I've seen more reprehensible stuff than what happened the other night, but it wasn't very good, and it was a huge missed opportunity. It tells you everything you need to know about Joe Biden. But before we go there, I just want to ask you, before we change topics, has anybody figured out what Vladimir Putin's endgame could possibly be? The best, I think, now that he can hope for is a 20-year occupation that's going to kill tens of thousands of Russian soldiers and still fail. I mean, eventually it's still going to fail. Russia just doesn't have the resources to have that type of occupation. It's the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed after 9 years of occupation in Afghanistan. They ran out of money.
I really think he honestly thought that he would be done with this 2-3 weeks tops, and Ukraine would bluster, and then at the end of the day they'd fold, and that would be it. I'll tell you what's going to happen. I think Vladimir Putin is dead man walking. I mean, you saw one of his oligarchs actually came out and threw his weight and support behind the Ukrainians, and apparently he's helping buy ammunition.
Yep.
What's going to happen is, let's not mince words about what Russia is today. It's not a communist state. It's not. It's a mafia state. It's an oil producing narco state. Basically, it's run by a mob boss, and all of the kingpins that are underneath him. At some point, they're going to get tired of this pretty darn quick. And I think if they're not there already, they're close to there. Putin's going to have to get real paranoid because somebody's going to pull a bullet in the back of his head.
Yep.
And you're just all of a sudden, you're just going to see a press release saying, oh, by the way, here's the new president of Russia.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be a July 20 plot.
Yeah.
Only one that succeeds because everybody will be in on it.
I actually, at this point, the way things are going, I would be amazed if Putin sees the end of April.
Maybe even the end of March.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. There's apparently a rumor that Putin's going to declare martial law in Russia. Julia Ioffe was saying that one of her friends was racing to the Baltic states border to get out of Russia because there's a widespread belief that Putin's going to declare martial law. And I think at that point, the military is going to say, as long as we're here.
Exactly. Even
since we're up,
even Israel, which because of the Syria option, they've had to kind of play footsies with Putin because
understandably so. Yeah.
But even Naftali Bennett came out today, and he's even because that position, I understand Israel's position. on the international stage, it's an untenable one.
Yep.
I mean, it really honestly is. And Bennett finally came to that realization today, and even he's backing off of that whole thing. So, it's Putin versus the world, and it's even Putin versus his own underlings in the oligarchy class. But what I think you're gonna end up seeing here is you're going to see people do a revolt on the guy, and you're just going to wake up one day and it's going to be all over with.
Right.
We had one of our regular callers who we've known for I don't know 20 years. You probably know who this is too, Yoni.
Oh yeah, Yoni. Yeah, he's great.
Yoni the blogger.
Yeah, he's called in a couple times when I've guest hosted too. So yeah.
He's a former IDF dual citizen. Was a cop here in Seattle for a bunch of years. Was a special officer in the IDF, and he came out with a theory today, or an option today that I thought was actually kind of smart. I hadn't thought of it yet. He floated the idea of having Western countries offer the Russian soldiers the off-ramp that Putin is not willing to take for himself or for the country, which is if you lay down your weapons, if you're a Russian soldier, because if you go back to Russia and you don't fight, you're dead, right?
Right.
Or, they'll shoot you and they'll kill everybody around you.
Pour encourager les autres.
Right. So
yes.
What if the West says if you lay your weapons down or turn your weapons over to the Ukrainians, you get a green card?
Yeah. Well, I think that, and I think that that's sort of de facto what's going on right now. They're capturing some of these young kids,
but they're capturing some of these kids. But I'm saying, why not pull the psyops on them and actually start broadcasting that?
Yep. All right, let's move to the State of the Union address because we got a few minutes left here, and there were two ways that Joe Biden could have gone, and apart from the Ukraine part, which was rhetorically good but substance free. I mean, we really didn't offer anything of substance to Ukrainians other than
because
lots of praise.
He's not leading.
Right.
I can't tell you it was rhetorically good.
Well,
it was embarrassing.
Well,
to have an American president look at the horrors that are unfacing, looking at the war crimes that are unfolding, and he can't even on an international stage call the war crime the war crime. He can't start to sell the American people. He's as worthless as a tit on a turnip.
That was a missed opportunity, certainly. So is the whole State of the Union address, though. I mean, here you have a president who is plunging to new lows almost every day in polling.
He's helping me out. My goal is to get him into the 20s by the time we get to the midterm.
Well, you don't even need to. I'm not even sure you need to lift a finger, man. He's doing that by himself. And this whole speech, I mean, this is the type of situation, this confidence crisis cascade situation, which he's clearly been in since he abandoned Americans and American allies in Afghanistan in his rush to surrender to the Taliban. The State of the Union address is his best opportunity to reset, right? Say, okay, look, I know that Americans think that things have gone on the wrong track. And so, look, what we're going to do is we're going to address the things that seem to be the most critical right now for American people. That's inflation, that's crime. We're going to change the policies that we followed in order to address those situations up front. And we're going to make that our focus. We're going to put aside the rest of the agenda. We're going to make these, 3 or 4 issues our focus. Instead, what did we get? We got Buildback Better.
I'll tell you what we got. What we got was the Buildback Better, which was the Titanic sinking in the Atlantic. Joe Biden dredged up, lifted the Titanic back to the surface, and took all 3 pieces of the Titanic and offered it as 3 new boats.
Yes. And promised that it would get to shore this time.
Right. And
climb back aboard.
And promised it was still seaworthy.
Yeah, climb back aboard. It won't sink again. It's great. These things are great. I mean, I don't remember a State of the Union address from a president who is as disconnected from political reality as Joe Biden is. I mean, that's the only thing you can conclude from this is this guy has no idea what's going on.
Here's how we're going to lower inflation, and here's how we're going to get things back under control. We're going to subsidize everything we want to subsidize, and that's how you lower costs.
Yeah.
Not apparently understanding basic economics, whereas if you wallpaper the country so that you are putting a premium on the demand of a product or service, take the childcare industry, right? Everybody wants free childcare or reduced costs for childcare. So you're going to give all sorts of benefits and subsidies to people. Well, people that aren't in the market for childcare are now going to be in the market for childcare. Do you think that there is going to instantaneously be 500 times the amount of childcare options that there are today, just because there's a bunch of money out there? No, there's not. Which means you're going to have more money chasing a finite amount of supply. And what is that actually going to do to the price?
Because it's going to, it's
go
the same
through
thing.
The roof.
It's the same as it did with the stimulus package in March, which Larry Summers warned about. And by the way, did you see Larry Summers' reaction to the State of the Union address yesterday? He was not a happy guy. He called it. It wasn't diversionary, but it was something like that. Basically, it was dishonest, which is what he said the first time too.
What's the classical definition of insanity again?
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Yeah.
So Joe Biden is insane, is what we're saying, right?
I'll put it this way: Joe Biden is
according to the classical definition.
I would just say this. I'm going to stick with my classical definition of Joe Biden. He's 20 pounds of bullshit in a
10-pound bag. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So Duane, he just doesn't know anything. He's just a dummy.
And we can talk about the gaffes. We can talk about Uranians, which was funny as hell, by the way. You can talk about a pound of Ukrainians. You can talk about go get them at the end of the speech. I mean,
what the hell is that?
I have no idea. That's sort of like, did you ever see the South Park episode with Al Gore where he says Excelsior and then jumps off the screen with a cape on? I mean, that's sort of an Excelsior.
I don't know if that was trying to channel Reagan and go win one for the Gipper. I don't know what that. I don't know what that.
Which by the way, Reagan never actually used.
Actually said. Right.
Well, he said it in a film.
In a movie.
In a movie.
Scripted, yeah. Right.
Yeah, but he didn't say it in the State of the Union address. I'm sure he referred to it from time to time on the stump, but he.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean. There is no hope. If you're a Democrat looking at this, right? You're a Democrat looking at this, looking at
You're doomed. You're doomed.
It's
doomed.
There is no reset. There's no recognition that a reset is even needed.
There's no agenda. There's nothing to run on. There's nothing to stop the bleeding.
Well, I take that back.
Political tourniquet.
There was an agenda. It's the same agenda that's been losing for the last year.
Right.
He's doubling down on failure is what he's doing.
He didn't offer a tourniquet to stop the bleeding.
Not even a Band-Aid. I mean, not even a recognition that there was bleeding in the first place. He's up there thinking that he's in the 60s and it's a great time for a stay the course speech. I mean, it's absurd. The level, he's still talking about green energy sources replacing fossil fuels.
Did you see how Ron Klain went on Twitter with a bunch of radical lefties and did a Twitter confab afterwards? And what he actually said?
Yes.
He said the American people haven't fully internalized the processes yet of how great things are with the economy.
Yeah. Haven't internalized how great 7.5% annualized inflation actually is. A 9% annualized producer price index inflation actually is
7.5. We're gonna, by the time we get to election day, we're gonna look back at 7.5 as the glory days.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the Goldman Sachs thing, but they said, you know what? We've changed our mind. Inflation isn't going down at all this year.
No.
It's going to be rolling all the way down to the midterms.
Jerome Powell tried to say yesterday it was going to go down. He says, we're going to do a quarter point hike, and we may do another one down the road, but we're pretty confident that inflation's going to, kind of take care of itself and roll off and go down a little bit as the year progresses.
Absolutely insane.
There is no metric that it's going to do that.
Nope. Nope, no metric at all. So what you have here is you have a president who's disconnected from reality. You've got a White House that's just as disconnected from reality. And then on top of all that, you have the squad who starts attacking him from the left. Rashida Tlaib. Did you actually watch Rashida Tlaib's response?
It was basically the Communist Manifesto is what it was. But that's not what the greatest part about that was. You saw what the greatest part about that was.
Well, I'm not sure because there are so many great parts about that
While she was giving that speech, do you know who booked herself and was on TV counter-programming Rashida Tlaib at the same time?
No. I must have missed this part.
AOC went on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow. And so now they're eating their own. They're competing amongst themselves for the fever swamp.
Yep. Indeed they are. And it should be a very interesting midterm as a result. I don't know if Republicans will shoot themselves in the foot.
Two of AOC, it's the Republicans. Anything can happen. Two of AOC's preferred primary candidates for the Democrats in two different congressional races in Texas won their primaries last night. Yeah. Now, if they are AOC approved Democrats in Texas, I'm liking my chances even more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you saw what happened here in Texas, but the extremes didn't do terribly well here. They really thought that they were going to knock off Henry Cuellar. Jennifer Cisneros she ended up forcing a runoff, but she still finished behind Cuellar. And I suspect that after the State of the Union speech, they're going to be the left is going to be even less inclined to turn out and vote in a runoff election, and I think the conservatives near the border are going to turn out in droves.
Did you see the CBS poll about the State of the Union speech?
Yes, I did. The lowest enthusiasm level since George W. Bush's 2007, I believe it was.
Correct.
2007.
And did you see the makeup of that poll?
Yeah, I mean, and the reason why is because it was a poll of State of the Union viewers. And State of the Union viewers are primarily comprised of two population types. One is supporters of the president, and the other are masochistic bloggers. I'm firmly in the second camp, Duane.
I understand that. But what I'm saying is if the number that you got of people that thought he did a good job, and you just kind of you went through that thinking that it was based upon a reflection of the electorate at large, it's still not a very good number. But when you look at it, and the sample was 49% Democrats, 28% independents, and only 21% Republicans, and he still can only pull a 49%.
Right. Yeah. No, man, I wrote about it.
That's death. I mean, that's political death.
Yeah, there is no enthusiasm in the Democratic Party for this president, and as a result, the turnout model is going to be brutal in the midterms, just absolutely brutal in the midterms for Democrats. It's going to be, right now at least, it's looking like a red tsunami, not just a red wave. And again, things change. We're in March. We're talking 8 months from now, just a little under 8 months from now, we're going to have this.
I totally agree with you. But again, point to me, name me one thing, name me two things that could take place that's going to turn it around.
Well, I think a sudden deceleration of inflation would help. Unfortunately, the Biden administration said you'd have to ramp up American oil production. You'd have to restart the process of getting the Keystone Pipeline open so that futures prices on oil would drop dramatically.
But they are hell-bent on not doing that.
Right.
Jennifer Granholm, the energy secretary, yesterday on a podcast said, we're in the middle of a transition. We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
We're just not.
We're in the middle of a transition to high prices at the pump, endemic inflation, and a return to the malaise of the late 1970s. That's the transition we're making.
And he's just trying to do a con job and a shell game and begging to try to wallpaper the country with cash again and try to get everybody anesthetized on a sugar high one, just long enough to get through the midterms.
Right.
The Republicans aren't going to give that to him. Joe
Nope.
Manchin's not going to give that to him.
Nope. And he's made that clear, by the way, in the last couple of days. Manchin is not going to do that. He's made that extremely clear. Again, they're going to fight the same war that they just fought twice, and they're going to lose it again.
Twice.
And they're going to lose it again. Because, all right, we're really kind of out of time here. Just want to give you one little breaking news story. Just let you give it like a 60-second react. Doug Ducey has made it official. He will not run for Senate in Arizona this year. Now you've got Sununu, Ducey, and Hogan, and there's one other governor who isn't Republican governor who won't cross over for the Senate. But I mean, what does that say to you? Especially when you're looking at a cycle that's going to be as friendly to Republicans as possible when these governors don't want to make that transition.
I am less worried about Arizona than other states. Mark Brnovich is running for Senate there, and I think I think with Ducey out of the race, Brnovich is the odds-on favorite. I don't think that changes that dynamic as much as some other places. Yep. I would have loved to have seen Chris Sununu run up in New Hampshire. I think he would have walked away with that race. I think Larry Hogan, even though I don't agree with Larry Hogan policy-wise on as much as others in the Senate, Larry Hogan would have made that Maryland seat really, really competitive.
Yep.
But it is what it is.
It is what it is. All right.
We just got to ride the wave.
Now we're going to do more of this tonight in the Universe. So people who haven't yet signed up for the Universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, you will be missing out on Duane's after show tonight. I usually do it on Wednesday nights, but tonight I'm doing it on Thursday night because I made an ash out of myself last night. And we're going to talk about some of these same things. Of course, Duane's going to have lots of cuts to play. He's probably going to give me all sorts of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris clips to listen to tonight. So
it depends if they say anything. But I may play for you the Jill Biden cut from yesterday. Did you see that one?
No, I did not. So don't give it away. We're just going to leave that. We're going to tease that one out there. Jill Biden cut, a rare Jill Biden cut coming up on tonight's after show.
A rare Jill Biden cut, yes.
What's coming up on tomorrow morning's Hugh Hewitt show? Not next Friday, of course, but tomorrow, because next Friday I'm coming up.
Next Friday you're doing it. Yeah. But no, tomorrow. If you had to name one member of the Senate that has been the best by an order of magnitude, policy and messaging on Ukraine and what we should be doing, who would that one senator be?
Tom Cotton.
The best?
Well, he's okay. So obviously I guessed wrong.
Yeah, you guessed wrong. Oh, Cotton's great. Cruz is great. I love these guys to pieces. The one guy that has used social media the best, the one guy that has been the best as far as messaging to me has been Marco Rubio. He's going to be.
Oh, of course. And he has been great, and he's been on this for a very long time. So yes,
I think I adore Tom Cotton. I'm not minimizing anything that Tom Cotton has said about this. I can't point to a thing about foreign policy here that I would disagree with Cotton on. Marco Rubio has been. I mean, whether it's head games by way of social media, whether it's triangulating intelligence that are from public sources to get people. He's been able to try and get people to care about this issue more than anybody else in the Senate. Yep. And he'll be on with you tomorrow.
All right. So that's coming up tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Eastern time, 5 a.m. in God's time zone, 3 a.m. on the left coast. If you don't have if you're a member of the Universe, you can watch it live. Even when I'm doing it, you can watch it live. And I'll be doing it a week from tomorrow. If not, you have to listen to it on the AM radio dial. Duane, what should people do if they can't find it on the AM radio dial?
I think what you do is you seize the general manager's expensive yacht, and you basically treat him like a Russian oligarch.
Well, there you go. I was also going to suggest that we probably need to get the Uranians involved.
Uranians,
because apparently Vladimir Putin's imperial ambitions are also on Uranus. And because I'm 12 years old, we're going to have to close it down at that. Duane, Generally Smith,
probably for the best.
of the universe. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks a lot. I'll see you tonight.
See you tonight. Stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me is Michelle Easton, author of the book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. This is now coming out in paperback. This came out last year, and it's done so well that Regnery, which is a unit of Salem Communications, as is Hot Air, has already accelerated this into paperback. And Michelle Easton is here to join us to talk about that, and also to talk about her pending visit to CPAC. I'm not going to be there, but Michelle will be. We'll talk about that a little bit too. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
And I know we're catching you just as you're trying to get ready to go to CPAC because it starts in a couple of days. But you make the rounds at CPAC anyway. How are you going to? First off, are you presenting at CPAC, or are you going to just be making the rounds there?
Well, I'm going to be making the rounds, but also we're going to have a college women's lunch featuring Allie Stuckey. So we'll have all the college girls in a room to shore them up, give them confidence and courage, and Allie's a great speaker. And then we also recruit. We recruit for internships and staff at CPAC. So I won't be at the podium, but I'll be doing other things which are key as well.
Well, honestly, I think you should be at the podium. I'm surprised that CPAC didn't make that offer to you, because I think that this is one of the topics that I think is almost an evergreen topic, is how do you raise conservative kids in our culture and political climate? And you have a whole book devoted on just how to do that. And I think this might be a better topic than whatever else they're discussing right there, especially if they're looking at the future of conservatism.
Well, you're very kind. I really appreciate that. But the truth is, I think the book is selling so well because it's not preachy. It's what I've learned over 29 years of running the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women. I work with these unbelievably accomplished college girls, and I started to accumulate information about how is it that they turned out so well. So I wrote a book, and it's what I've learned over 29 years with thousands of girls, some of whom are like daughters to me. And there's certain key things that moms and dads have to do it's not a silver bullet. It's not a guarantee, but you're going to have a better shot at raising your daughter. Here's the truth. When you and I were growing up, if your family was conservative and you went to church, you had a pretty good shot that she'd turn out okay. But today, with the indoctrination in the schools, the destructive social media, the popular culture, you've got to do more as a mom and a dad and a grandparent, anybody working with these girls, to have a better shot that she turns out well.
Well, and I think that this is in part because of the way that the culture has been transformed by social media, by but cable TV. I mean, cable TV is probably the first really big disruptor for this, and then you've got social media on top, the internet, then social media on top of that. You don't have that sort of containable culture that when I was growing up. I think you're younger than I am, but when I was growing up, you didn't have any of that. You had the 3 broadcast networks and a few independent television stations. I grew up in Los Angeles, or in the Los Angeles area. And so, I mean, there were certainly cultural influences, television being one of them, but it was more containable. There was more local community than global community. And I think that's one of the big issues that you're addressing in this book.
Absolutely. And just think about the schools. When I went, I think I might be older than you, Ed, but when I went, there were no teachers I knew or principals that didn't share my parents' traditional values. They weren't there. But today, whoa, there's all kinds of other agendas in the public schools. And also, I learned from my own children, even in the private schools. So you can't really trust the schools to ensure that your daughter is going to share your values. And then the other thing is social media. Oh, my goodness. Many parents don't even realize how powerful social media can be. And one of the things I recommend in the book is limiting the time your girls spend on social media. You can't really ban it totally, although some parents do, but the analogy I draw is when my boys were growing up, TV was the bad guy with all kinds of influences. And our rule was school nights, we don't watch TV. So that limited it tremendously. Find a way to limit the time they spend on it and restrict their access to these horrible websites that are very, very harmful.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is. I think we were talking about that in terms of television. By the way, I'd like to correct you on one important fact. Nobody's older than I am, Michelle.
You tell me how old you are, I'll tell you how old I am.
No. We don't need to get into that, Michelle. But at least that's the way I feel in the mornings. Nobody's older than me. But
you sound quite young, so good for you.
There you go. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, we were talking about limiting television, right? When we were kids, I mean, our parents would limit the amount of television. You know, we always push back against that, of course, but it was just easier to contain. Those types of things were easier to contain, and part of the reason why it's almost impossible to contain that now is because so many of the tools for education are now online, and especially over the pandemic. I mean, I know this came out last year, so we were in the middle of the pandemic. You were probably writing this mostly the year before that, and because I know what publishing cycles look like. Well, almost every child in America that was getting an education was doing it online, at least for part of that year. And when you do that, I mean, that breaks those things down even further, and it makes online discipline, I guess you can say. I don't want to say discipline in terms of punishment, but online discipline in terms of limiting and controlling the influences on your children. It makes it impossible.
Yes, it's very, very hard. Although I must say the parents getting to see what was going on in the schools probably did more for school choice than anything since I've been working on that issue.
You know, you're right about that. It wasn't all bad. I mean, you had schools that were at one point forbidding parents to be in on the calls, which I think set up huge red flags for parents. And they,
right. And around here, I'm in Northern Virginia. I can tell you that every private school in this area has a mile-long waiting list. There's just people that just want to in a better environment than what they're getting in the public schools. Not that there aren't some wonderful public schools, and I went to great public schools in New York State where I grew up, but things are different today. And private school's not a guarantee either, and I know that from my own children. But there's some real problems with the government-run education these days, and parents are reacting by getting on the waiting list for the private schools.
Well, I think so too, and I apologize for the noise. I had a little accident with the microphone here, which is always great for podcasts, right? I mean, this is sort of like my live show used to be. It's like you get a chance to see all the things that go wrong on the Ed Morrissey show. But Michelle, I want to talk. I do want to get into the book here because I think first off you address all of these issues really in the book too, but as well you're addressing some really core values here. And when I say core values, I'm talking about philosophy. So for instance, your very first chapter, right, is about self-worth and what the origin of that self-worth is. And it's not government, and it's not television, it's not ABC, NBC, CBS, or HBO. Thank goodness.
Right.
It flows from God.
Right. It flows from God, not government. And this is really the key concept, probably the most important concept to be sure that your daughter understands. Self-worth is a deeply conservative concept, and the greatest gift you can give your daughter is to understand that she's uniquely made and unconditionally loved by God. And it's quite different from self-esteem, which is something you hear a lot about in the schools. I mean, self-esteem is something where you turn to other people for validation. And I'm not saying it's bad to have self-esteem, but self-worth is a much deeper concept. And knowing that she's uniquely made, and that government can never substitute for a good mother and father, much less for God. So much of what is conveyed to young women in schools, in popular culture, in media, is that affirmative action, government-funded health care, free stuff is what gives you self-worth. You just collect all that you can. And yet we know that dependency on these programs fuels socialist and leftist beliefs, because to them, government is the God. So it's a really key concept, and you just have to work at it and make a difference, and let your daughter understand the difference between self-worth, which is a sense of your own value as a human being created by God, and self-esteem, which is sort of confidence and some satisfaction in yourself. They're quite different.
Right. And I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that this focus on self-esteem for self-esteem's own sake has kind of turned us into the sort of the narcissists that social media sort of exacerbates. It's a trend that social media exacerbates, where it puts everybody at the center of the universe. I mean, that's even apart from a belief in God. I mean, it is really this sort of self-absorption, I think, and social media really amplifies this, and that is a tremendous difficulty for conservative parents who want to raise their children with conservative values.
That's right. That's right. It's a huge distraction. But I argue in this book that by doing some things very mindfully, very thoughtfully, things that our parents didn't have to do, they're going to have a much better shot. One of the things I talk about is conversations. Now, I know moms and dads talk to their kids, but a little bit more in-depth conversations, dinner table conversations, if possible. I know it's not always possible. Kids are working, mom and dad might have the night shift, but if you can have dinner together most nights and take the time to talk about things, you're really going to enrich your relationship with your daughter. Sit together, tell stories, laugh, talk, turn the phone off, put the laptop away, and conversations about some of these issues. One example I give is that what does that mean? America is an exceptional country. I mean, talk to them about it. What does that mean? Well, it's a country founded unique at the time on the notion that our rights come to us from God, not from government. That's what makes us exceptional. And the founders formed the government only to protect those God-given rights and explain to them the difference between, these totalitarian societies. Why do they impose atheism? Because people of faith know that self-worth comes from God, not government, and this threatens dictators' control and power. They torture, they beat, they imprison people of faith. Why do they do that? They do it in order to crush freedom movements and to enforce atheism. So that's a great conversation. What makes America exceptional? And talk that through at dinner, or maybe when you're driving the kids in the car, or whatever. Make a point to raise some of these issues and talk about it. Not preach. I tend to preach to my own kids. But to talk through these issues. Why would anybody say we're exceptional? Well, it's easy, Ed. It's easy.
Right. No, I completely agree with you here. And again, we're speaking with Michelle Easton. The book is How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. The paperback version is just out this week. And you can order that on Amazon. I want to go through a couple of the other chapters here. One is, I think, even more pertinent these days than maybe we thought it would be last year. A woman's differences are her strengths.
Yes.
Honestly, I mean, we have, as a culture, I'm not saying you and I, but the culture has adopted a nihilistic approach to biological sex, which is to say that it refuses to recognize it. It refuses to acknowledge the differences, and assumes that differences means difference in dignity, which it doesn't. And so I think this part of the book especially is, it really reflects the fact that conservatism really should be based on truth. And the truth is that human beings are made with two biological sexes, and they're different. They're complementary, but they are different. And I'm going to let you go ahead and springboard off of that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite chapters, Chapter 5, A Woman's Differences Are Her Strengths. And let me say first, here at the Luce Center for Conservative Women, our staff, our interns, our leaders are not allowed to use the word gender, because gender is what you think you are, and we want to talk about sex. The truth is that having your daughter celebrate the natural variations between men and women, the breathtaking miracle of childbirth, it elevates her. And, yet the left teaches girls that having children is a patriarchal burden. It's inconvenient. It limits their success. I mean, left propaganda that men and women are exactly the same is just a lie. It's a lie. And this fellow who's winning all the swim meets now, I mean...
Right, it's what I was just thinking about, because... And the reason why I was thinking about this is my colleague John Sexton wrote about this, and we're talking on Tuesday here, so it's today's... it was a post in today, about how everyone at that swim meet knows that what is going on with Leah Thomas is wrong, but nobody will speak about it because they're afraid to stand up to this culture. It's cowardice.
Yes, it is. It is. And he's not a girl. He's a boy who, I guess, wants to be a girl, but his physical body, his lungs, his bone strength, his muscles are a boy's. And so he's taking hormones. It doesn't matter. Just look at him. Just look at him, and you see why he's going to beat the girls, because he's not a girl. He's a boy who wants to be a girl. And, you know, my heart goes out to people with that affliction or to that leaning, but don't wreck sports for girls. So many girls. You know, we fought so long for girls to have their own teams, and back when I was in school, girls didn't have teams. That shows you how old I am. And now... in high school and college, they have to let the boys in to beat them. It's so outrageous. Another sub part of this that I want to mention, Ed, is that before she starts to date, okay, mom and dad need to teach her that physical intimacy affects women very differently from men. And we actually have a booklet, College Girl's Guide to Real Protection in a Hooked Up World, that explains in a factual medical way. It's not moralistic, it's not preachy, again, because that's not the way to reach so many girls. There are differences between men and women when it comes to just basic sexuality and the things that people do on dates. And if they understand this, they will have a much happier life. You know who the biggest group that orders this little brochure from us are? It's the life clinics. For the girls who've made a mistake, and they've had one out of wedlock, but they don't understand that it's very different between men and women. So any of your listeners who want this Sense and Sexuality, the College Girl's Guide to Real Protection in a Hooked Up World, please give us a call here.
We're going to get the contact information at the end of the podcast, so stay tuned for that. I want to talk about one other thing here, and it also relates to this, to a similar issue. And I'm not going to. This is not in the philosophical or ideological weeds. This is just really very good advice for all young people, but I think especially for young women. Manage money early and often. I mean, I can't tell you how bad I was at this when I was in my early 20s, right? I mean, I ran up credit card debt. I never had any cash. I always wondered how my friends were able to do more things than I was. It's because I was, just tossing money away. And it wasn't really until I got married that I started taking that aspect of my life more seriously. And I wish I had learned that earlier. I would have had a little bit more, wealth. The reason, wealth. I use that in a relative sense, right? Retirement funds is kind of what I'm talking about. But the reason why this is more important for women is that I think women end up putting themselves in a position where they're relying on men to for that economic security, and it can put you in bad choice positions, is what I'm saying. And I think it's more important for women, more important than ever for women, to really be masters of this.
Yes, and what I suggestion here for moms and dads, and some do this already, is starting them out when they're little with a piggy bank, and sort of the understanding that you get perhaps gifts, or maybe you earn it with chores, and then if you want to buy something, you're going to take some of that money away out of the piggy bank. When they get to a certain age, having a little savings account is good. And then when it gets to credit card time, and some kids get them in high school, I never did, but helping them work through it. And it's all this notion, really, that this free stuff, this left-wing socialist liberal notion, we just get free stuff. And understanding there is no free stuff. Somebody always has to pay for it. So teaching her when she's young, the principles about money management, just from a little girl, and then she's a teenager, and then she goes off to school maybe, or whatever. If it's done early, you have a better shot that she's going to be responsible. That if she marries and she has a husband and together they earn or they take care of the family, great. But as you said, we know 1 in 2 marriages fails, unfortunately. And a lot of women, suddenly they're on their own and they have families maybe. They need to learn how to manage money and some of the principles about money at a very young age. And I've got a whole chapter on this. That's chapter 7. Manage money early and often. A lot of suggestions for what moms and dads can do to have a better shot that she knows what she's doing.
Absolutely. And I think that is absolutely key. And just to close the loop on that, I want to let my parents off the hook. They did all those things with me. I've got a thick skull is what the problem is. So I tended to sort of learn lessons the hard way and still do to some extent. So, but yes, those are great suggestions. And by the way, I know we're almost out of time, and I want to give Michelle Easton, the author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter, an opportunity to tell you how to get in touch with her, how to get in touch with the Luce Institute, how to and where to go to get that pamphlet, especially. Michelle, give us the links, give us all the information that you got on that.
You can come to our website, cblwomen.org, and you can get in touch with us that way. That's probably the easiest way, especially since we're all leaving to go to CPAC.
Right.
We do have a phone here, 703-318-0730. That's in Virginia. And let me give you the 800 number as well. The 800 toll-free is 888-891-4288. And we really want to help young women who are interested in becoming conservative leaders. We want to help them in every way we can. And this book, the goal of the book, really, Ed, is to get people thinking about conservative values, how to instill them in their daughters with real-life applications. And again, it's a long-term process. I mean, if your daughter's already in college, well, you can still do some of this stuff. If she's in high school or if she's in grammar school, you got a better shot. But it's parents thinking about it and not just assuming because your family is conservative and of faith that your daughters will be. You have to work at it in this day and age.
Indeed. And Michelle Easton, I want to thank you for being with us. Again, the website at least, and I'm sure you can get all the other contact information. In fact, I see the phone numbers right at the top of the page there. cblwomen.org, cblwomen.org. And, of course, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You can find that on Amazon.com. You can also go to cblwomen.org, and there's a link to it there as well. You can actually read the first chapter online at cblwomen.org, so be sure to check that out.
You got a freebie there.
Yeah, you got a freebie. You can get a head start even before it arrives from Amazon. Michelle Easton, thank you so much for being with us, and good luck at CPAC. Hope you have a great time.
Thank you, Ed, for all you do. Appreciate your work.
Well, thank you very much. We'll be right back.